Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out about Elizabeth Barrett Browning by Fiona Sampson. This is a short read. I started it yesterday, I didn't finish it. Yet there's another turn in the story. This often triumph life is also the mirror and beneficiary of its brutal times. Jamaican and Madeiran ancestry makes Elizabeth question her own ethnicity, a sensibility that will course of literary history is built on a shifting, uncertain self-image. But if we think that the shadow self she imagines in the mirror is truly black, or that she's haunted by the figure of another self denied the leisure and literacy that have made her a poet, we should think again. Elizabeth Barrett Browning is the daughter and granddaughter of slavers. It's their prodigious sugar fortunes that allowed her extraordinary talents to develop. Even her elopement is financed by this money, despite the fact that by the time she runs away, both she and her husband are abolitionists. The self jars against circumstance when Elizabeth emerges from the mercantile and firmly unliterary background as a child prodigy and declares that not only she will be a poet, but that she already is one. It should be a reach too far. In 1806, the year of her birth, women can neither vote nor, in England at least, own property once married. Even the wealthiest receive relatively little formal education and are barred from all but from the oldest profession. On marriage, they pass from their own father's control to their husbands without becoming citizens on their own right. And it's not surprising that at the start of the 19th century, women writers tend to emerge in the company of literary men who have bought them all along, whether to accident or design. The exceptional talents of Maria Edgeworth, 1768 to 1849, Mary Shelley, 1797 to 1851, and the Bronte sisters, between 1816 and 1820, were all first recognized by educated intellectual fathers. Elizabeth's father, through no literate, also encourages his young daughter. Perhaps she owns a remarkable confidence to him. Literature was a star which to prospect illuminated my future days. It was the spur which prompted me, the aim, the very soul of my being. She asserts at 14, born 9 years after Mary Shelley and 10 years before Charlotte Bronte. She starts writing as a child of 6 by her own reckoning and doesn't stop until 5 years before her death. Her first surviving poem, On the Cruelty of Forcemen to Man, is written in the Hertfordshire country house of her childhood. Her last, The North of the South, also 4 decades later in Rome, in May 1861, a month before her death. The anonymous narrator of Aurora Leigh, a masterpiece Elizabeth publishes at 50, is transfixed by her similar passion. I may love my art. You'll grant that even a woman may love art, seeing that no wastes true love on anything, and womanly past question. The rhetoric sounds like an old goal. Its fact is strategic, lacking both social energy and education to the classical arts of logic and rhetoric that Father Brother's husband had received. No woman born at the start of the 19th century is unlikely to win the arguments by reasoning about who or what she is. She must learn instead to be stubborn, irrational, to claim that she too is a poet, that she must herself with her own weaknesses, which is to say her enthusiasm. I lived those days, I wrote because I lived, unlicensed else, my heart beat in my brain. My heart beat in my brain. It sounds like a fury or madness, but the pulse is metrical, not manic. Elizabeth's success will be undeniable, the kind poets dream of and rarely achieve. Aurora Leigh, with which she crowns that success, will be an instant bestseller, the first edition selling out within a fortnight, and will go on to be one of the best read literary works in the second half of the 19th century. The verse Kunstel Roman, the specific story, specifically of the maker's development, or Bildungsstrom, will influence generations of poets and writers. Among the many women for whom it is immediately formative are George Eliot, Matthew Charlotte Mew, the writing duo who make up Michael Field and Emily Dickinson, who hangs the Rossetti portrait of Elizabeth in her room. but its success isn't limited by gender. Leading male writers, among them Rudyard Kipling, John Ruskin, Algernon Swinburne, and Oscar Wilde, will celebrate the works for decades to come. Aurora Leigh is a work of fiction, not memoir. Its 9 books map only indirectly into the 9 books of its author's own life. I finished the first book. It is, if any kind of how to vade mecum, is less a guide to practical professional steps than the thinking of oneself as a woman writer. Elizabeth's own story works in similar ways, that is, not so much guide as inspiration. But in portraying the development of a woman poet, Aurora Leigh does give us clues as to how its author herself managed to emerge. On her 20th birthday, the verse's novel protagonist, orphaned Aurora, refuses to marriage, both loving and advantageous, in order to dedicate herself to writing. Just before she does so, she crowns herself with a poet's wreath. What, therefore, if I can crown myself today in sport, not pride, to learn the feel of it, not pride, but to learn the feel of it? There's a crucial distinction. If she delayed until she or the world felt confident that she deserved poetic laurels, how long would Aurora or Elizabeth wait? In fact, laurel wreaths will crown Barrett Browning's coffin. What use are they to her by then? By practicing learning the feel of the tender prickering, the literary laurels, and how to tie rhymes is a way of doing without having to look at what we're daring to do. Modest and incredible, it's like the domestic starts of Aurora Leigh already knows. This is how a young woman slips past the gatekeepers of the feminine self and starts to write. Then I sate and teased, I patient needle till I split the thread, which oozed off from its meandering lace from hour to hour. I like the oozing thread, which just doesn't want to lie down, and it slips out of the needle between the fingers that try to tie it tight, like a little metaphor for creative disobedience. Practice makes perfect, as many of the samplers instructed the girls who was embroidering it, but Elizabeth hadn't always been patient. At 13, in the preface of her first printed work, The Battle of Marathon, she also innocence insouance. Happily, it is now. It was in the days of Pope. Not even the female may drive her Pegasus through the realms of Parnassus without being saluted with the most equivocal of all the appellations, a learned lady without being celebrated by her friends at a Sappho, or traduced by her enemies as a pedant without being abused in the review or criticized in society. Unfortunately, the reception of her adult work will show that this isn't always true. The 2 centuries later, we need to catch up on if we find our thinking selves. Thinking, happily, is not to know, but is always in the days of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, for while Elizabeth is very much a creature of her own times, she also fits her own. As a woman working on the problem of how to be herself, and despite the years of practice to come, this early teenager has the eye on the prize. Already, she has never to be satisfied with the comparative respect, which means the absolute scorn. What matters is her isn't producing tolerable verse for being a true poet judged by the highest standards. Her heart beats in her brain. Still, this question remains hanging. What if women can't produce real art? Among female authors who make room for their fairer writer and congratulate the country that produces in these times, such women compete to spell. In this biting parody of a kind of reviewing she has actually experienced, the poets come close to revealing herself, but Elizabeth Barrett Browning is not Aurora Leigh. Real life differs from fiction, partly because of the verse's novel. Author has money and room of her own. In the famous phrase, Virginia Woolf will coin 70 years later from now, in a room of her own, of one's own. Yet critical reception is a kind of mirror, even a distorting one, in which writers check their progress, however much they intend not to. Reading is another. Everyone needs a companion in their sentimental education, and for a writer developing a provincial isolation, books take the place of a peer group. As a young woman, Elizabeth has plenty of accounts of a writer's struggle to keep her company. Influential form-expanding romantic biographies and memoirs like Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Confessions, 1782, and William Godwin's, members of the author of The Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1798, have long been in print. In the year she turns 18, Lives of the Poets, Boswell's Life of Johnson, Southey's Life of Nelson, Lockhart's Life of Burns, Moore's Life of Sheridan, Moore's Life of Byron, Wolfe's Remains can be read even in remote Yorkshire vicarages, as we learn when Charlotte Bronte recommends them to a friend. They are certainly available to the wealthy family of the Barretts, and of course, all the books by men. What would the sentimental education of a woman look like? It is Elizabeth herself who will eventually provide an answer. Aurora Leigh is fiction, not biography, but literary biography is always the Bildungsroman, the story of how thinking, feeling, and self-images, and in this intimate respect, the story of Elizabeth Barrett Browning tells in Aurora Leigh is also the one her life story tells us. For poets understand, life develops from within. That's the end of the first lesson by Fiona Sampson on EBB. We will continue these lessons in the future. We pray for peace in the world. Have a nice day.